Hi, I'm Tamara Bond Williams, Membership Director of Space and Satellite Professionals International, the industry's leading, most international and cross disciplinary network of individuals and companies. On October 5th, 2021, at the Future Leaders Dinner in Mountain View, SSPI honored 20 young professionals who were under the age of 35. These young professionals are the rising stars of the space and satellite industry, and I had the good fortune of speaking with most of them last month on the topic of climate change. The conversation was thought provoking and a meaningful contribution to the currently ongoing climate sentence campaign that SSPI is engaging. Their efforts were funded by SES, who, with a fleet of over 70 satellites in 2 different orbits, invite us to take our stories anywhere. Additional support for the video was provided by the 20 under 35 cohort themselves. Another way in which that they demonstrate their leadership and stewardship of the future they are helping to create. SSPI thanks our corporate partners, Access Intelligence, Airbus OneWeb Satellites, Hughes, EchoStar, K&L Gates, and Northrop Grumman for their ongoing support. And we thank our global network of chapters, SSPI Wise, and our corporate and individual members around the world. With that, I invite you to join me in conversation with the 20 under 35 cohort for 2021, and let's keep making it a better satellite world. I just want to thank you all for being here, and I want to frame this conversation. So, as mentioned, we are here to talk about global climate change in our industry. How are we helping? How are we hurting? And what are we going to do about it? And so I just want to tell you a little bit about what's at the top of my mind right now. And this is just to kind of give you a sense of the kind of conversation I want to have. On the one hand, we as an industry do amazing things. The use case for the satellite industry is sometimes shockingly surprising. So I just read last week a story about the eradication of guinea worm in the country of Chad, Central Africa. And so when they were trying to figure out why is it not all gone already, they discovered by means of putting satellite tags on dogs that the reason this was not gone is that the dogs were eating discarded fish by humans, and the discarded fish contained the larvae for this worm, and so it was reinfecting the population. Well, that's a very, very shocking and very background role for the satellite industry, obviously. But that was not a trackable thing until they deployed satellites to make it happen. On the other hand, we know that, for instance, launching satellites into space involves rockets, and the rocket fuel can deplete the ozone layer. And so satellites are profoundly useful to humanity, and they are a big part of our fight against climate change and lots of other things that are impacting humans on the planet, but they are also sometimes part of the problem. And so I want to open up the conversation about how we're thinking about this. What are we doing about it? If any of your companies are doing anything special, if you are at liberty to talk about it, the floor is open.
Thanks for starting the conversation. What I was thinking, one thing that made me think, it was more the second part of what you say. How are we hurting? And I think space and the satellite industry, maybe because I'm biased because I work in it, but I think the the end goal or the sum of it is so positive that I cannot see how it offsets with the negative parts. Yes, rockets are not, they pollute. They are also not doing great to the biodiversity around where they are launched. But I think it's so local, and I think we can live with that, knowing the benefits that we can take out of that. So I was thinking from that prism, because I think within us, within our group, it's so obvious that I cannot think otherwise.
Maybe rocket is making it worse for the ozone, but the satellite I was working on, this has L-band, and then we can monitor the deforestation, and we need to see visualize and to tell the public, and then from the satellite you can always observe 24 hours what's going on, and so that we are aware, and then not only the deforestation, but also we can see the temperature depending on the sensors like infrared or L-band, or we have so many tools to attach to the satellite. And I think that helps greatly with climate change, because first we need to see what's going on and where, and the satellite best suits for those missions. So I think we are helping to at least tell the world what's going on.
I think about what satellite is doing and contributing to the climate change. Climate change is producing global shifts in population, in humans and in animals. And for the humans, the geosynchronous satellites aren't able to address those really far north and really far south latitudes. So moving into having these newer satellite constellations that are able to provide internet, provide that data coming out of those poles. That's something else that I think about in terms of the effects of climate change and how satellite is supporting both work to try to reverse it, but also how are we going to live with the new world that we're creating, that has been created, and having people move really far north.
Maybe if I can contribute from the SES perspective. Maybe you guys are familiar with SES. We are the largest satellite telecommunications provider with satellites in GEO and in MEO. And one of the initiatives that SES is doing is the SES Give Back program, that we support charities globally. It's not only like for humanitarian purposes, but also for climate change initiatives. So that's one of the ways that SES, at a corporate level, we are supporting these kind of initiatives. Also, maybe from the employee perspective, I work in the operations department, so we are like 24/7, like using a lot of energy. So one of the things that we are doing at the office is just basically trying to reduce our carbon footprint with the reducing the energy that we use, like just like the normal things, just like switching off the lights, are trying to not use that much printing, because we love like photocopies and everything, so we're trying to reduce that. So that's one of the things that SES, at least in the engineering department, is doing, and of course with the SES Give Back initiative.
That's a really cool use case, by the way. I haven't heard of that. I think this is, for me, it's to like why like Earth observation was really the area I wanted to work in, because you get to learn about all of these like use cases that I had no idea we would use like specifically space technology for, which is really cool. And like for me, it's kind of it's more tangible to know, like, I am trying to hopefully impact the world and make the world a better place with space technology and Earth observation specifically. Like, you are taking pictures of the Earth every day, so you can, physically see the change and try to, make action from that change. But I mean, with respect to how we're helping, I think in my field and as an operator for Earth imaging satellites, you can't fix what you can't see. And so I think that's what's really huge with Earth observation and having these constellations, at Planet, with daily imaging of the entire Earth's surface. Like, now we can see change that we previously have never been able to before. So things like, Amazon deforestation, we can really quantify this, because instead of having an annual survey of the forest, we can have, a daily survey, or, a much greater cadence or a higher cadence.
Mhm.
And then you can kind of that can then trickle down into policy making and actual change of how we can, stop these things from happening now that we know the real impact that these things are doing. But then how are we hurting? I mean, it's exactly what you said, right? These rocket launches, like, they are effectively damaging in the ozone. So things like, reusable rockets that are now being used, that's one way to create less waste. So and it's really also, I mean, how cool is it to see a rocket launch and then it land right after its first day's land, right? I mean, that's one of the coolest things in the world. I still remember watching the stream of the very first time SpaceX did that and like tearing up, because I was just like, wow, the math that goes into that is just mind blowing. I think I was in like orbital mechanics or something at the time as well, like in my undergrad. So seeing that and struggling with my homework and then seeing that people were able to achieve that was pretty mind blowing. But I think that's definitely one way we can at least try to mitigate the impact of these launches. And, these, now that we have rideshare missions, I think that's quite interesting as well, where we can really maximize the amount of rocket space we're using to hopefully have maybe less launches that can carry more satellites. But I think, the launch is definitely finding a way, other propulsion systems, perhaps electrical propulsion. I'm of course I'm not a propulsion engineer, so I know very little about that. But those other ways that we can, make launches a little bit more sustainable and eco-friendly, if that's even possible.
Is it just about quantifying? Are we able to see direct causation sometimes because we can see what's happening on a daily basis, or is it strictly we're just seeing the incremental change day by day? What's the benefit?
I think it definitely depends on the use case for sure. One thing that I'm trying to do, a part of my research now at Oxford, is, we have these data sets now that go back, a decade. And we know that, for example, droughts have happened over certain areas. Over the Horn of Africa, there was the drought around, I think it was 2011. And so we have, images, basically a time series of images from satellites and remote sensing data, so we can, see the change. And then we can use these past data sets to see if we can see any causation, because then, for future droughts, perhaps we can see early indicators and early warning signs. Same thing for floods or other things like that. Another project I'm working on actually with Planet Imagery is trying to determine the flow velocity in rivers upstream, so that we can be able to determine how great the flood is going to be downstream, where you're going to have damage to infrastructure. And so that's another way we can kind of get causation out of these as well. But because now we have this sort of library of data, we can use that past data to hopefully infer what's going to happen in the future. And that's ideally what I'm trying to do my PhD research on. So hopefully it works.
I'll piggyback off of what Kelsey just said. And there's such a wide variety of different data that scientists are now able to use on Earth prediction, on predicting the environment and predicting ecological systems and so forth. So you can marry that Earth observation data, the remote sensing data, with LiDAR, with radar, with other data that might be on the ground as opposed to in space. So the GIS capabilities that are awarded from space systems are really quite broad, and it really enables scientists a great overview and understanding of the Earth system. And it's really quite unprecedented in just like the last 10, 15 years. The amount of data has really gone exponential as well. And that's just going to increase with, other satellite systems that Planet and Spire and other great satellite companies are producing now. So before we had, just these large, often large research satellite programs, maybe at NASA. We had the weather satellite programs at NOAA, but now we have commercial satellites as well. And that is playing a huge, huge part in being able to predict what the environment does.
We are able with satellites to kind of, expose these trends in global temperature change with, weather satellites and training satellites. But one of the things that can be a little frustrating, I feel like, is, we're kind of just the people who are providing the information, and governments and, industry kind of has to decide what to do with that. We can say we know that temperatures are warming, but it falls on other people to actually take the action. So I think part of what we have to do is sort of lead by example. And for me, I feel like it's sort of this change in priorities. So when I think about the initial phases of satellite design, when we're getting a bid from a customer, we tend to focus on costs, we tend to focus on schedule, heritage, things like that. But I don't really see so much of a stress on sustainability. Like I've seen initiatives in different contracts where they want you to use a certain percentage of your work has to come from small businesses. And that, reflects the idea that we prioritize small businesses. But I think the change that we need to see is that, and this is not just for the satellite industry, pretty much everywhere, that we need to consider sustainability as something that's just as important, because otherwise, you're going to tend to go with the thing that either costs the least amount of money or has the most amount of heritage, which we already know those tend to be things that are not very sustainable, because 20, 30 years ago, we weren't really thinking about that. So I think that's part of the change in mentality we almost have to make, just to force ourselves to consider it and make it important.
And one example that I can bring from the company. So I'm Luis. I'm in Spain right now. I work in Germany for Airbus Defense and Space. And there's something coming up in the company, and we have a few people now getting engaged with it, which is more this thing of the concept of eco design, trying to think end to end the way we build, manufacture satellites. They also should be sustainable in a way. And this is definitely not a lot talked about. What we're trying to do is really to understand the materials that we're using, all the processes. Are we doing things the way that they should be done? Is there value on doing that or those things in that way? So I believe this is a discipline or a subject that maybe it's going to become more prominent in the future.
A unique thing about our sort of industry in terms of other technological companies is a lot of technology is disposable and gets thrown away after a few years. Satellites tend to stay up there for a long time. And I mean, I've worked on satellites that are 30 years old. And there is, one thing that there's a threat to, I think, is as the cost of launches go down and as the technology gets cheaper, there is an appeal to do like rapid prototyping, right? And build and launch satellites very quickly with shorter lifespans. But I would say in general, right, our industry is pretty good about creating a lasting product that, I mean, I haven't had a computer for 30 years ever, but satellites are up there for a really long time, right? So it's something I think that is unique to us.
Yes, I agree, Brandon. I think that's how it's typically always been. But now with the whole like new space approach, right? Like commercialization, small sats, microsats, throwaway sats, like all over the place. Like look at the Starlink. I mean, how many of them are not operational anymore after what, like 2-3 years? So something that's been bugging me while I love working in that industry is like, what do we do to the upper atmosphere where all this stuff re-enters, all different metals, plastics, really anything just burning up in the atmosphere, as we always like to say, sort of solves the issue of orbital debris, but what does it actually do to our atmosphere and our planet?
One thing that I love that I've seen is Millennial Space Systems has a product that I think it's called like the Dragster. And it actually goes around to clean up some of those dead satellites with a tether. And I would love to see, I did a lot of thinking about this because I've taught a lot of my students about space junk, saying that is an emerging industry in the aerospace world, that especially if you're looking at sustainability, but you're also interested in space or rockets or airplanes or anything in the aerospace industry, like this could be a great avenue for you. What I would love to see is with every launch that we do, like there's a component that maybe takes a dead satellite down. Like maybe you have to, if you are launching a rocket, then there is a requirement that everyone puts in such and such amount for the Dragster to go up with it and take 3 more down, and try to create a balance in our own launches that maybe wouldn't be so cumbersome if we incorporate it into our actual launch practices.
Activities like limiting space debris, limiting the hazardous materials that we use in space, and then also kind of effectively stewarding really high demand LEO orbits so that we can manage the risk of collisions and the production of more debris, I think is all really important because, those orbits are just as much part of the environment as, our oceans and our glaciers and that sort of thing. So I think that space and the satellite industry has a real opportunity here to, if we can make progress from like a policy and regulatory perspective in those areas, I think we can show the world that it is possible for industry to develop Earth's resources in like a responsible and sustainable manner. And we can really be an example that other industries can follow if we can do it right. And we're kind of at the point now where it can kind of go either direction. So I think it's a really important point for us to focus on in the coming years.
I work in commercial communications antennas, but from an information perspective, which is usually what I'm more focused on, satellites provide a profound amount of information for climate change. But with respect to the communications infrastructure, providing communications worldwide would directly benefit any ongoing effort for any technological or scientific effort. But it can also be detrimental. I don't, as we've all seen with the past few years with social media, but information is arguably intrinsically good with any scientific effort.
Back to Raven's point earlier, we can produce all of this data, but, we rely on decision-making parties to actually do something about it. I work for Ursa Space Systems, and we have a virtual constellation. So we don't have any satellite own, but we work with SAR satellite providers, synthetic aperture radar, and we run analytics, and we find out things about clear cutting, coastal erosion, illegal fishing, and honestly, there's not a lot of money in that right this second, but my role is actually director of customer experience, and so I'm in charge of marketing. And I think that if we look at our industry, we have the capability, because everybody thinks space is cool, right? Let's just agree on that. We have the capability to put this information out there and make it easily accessible for people, so that they then latch on to the idea that there is change that's possible, and that there are opportunities for change, and basically creating that niche in those decision-making parties to drive change.
We as an industry can see things that people can't see without us. We have, as an expanding part of our industry, what you do, which is interpret the data and make it available. And yet, right? We are sufficiently backgrounded that this amazing work that we do goes unremarked by a wider public. And so some of the good that we could be doing in terms of influencing public opinion is very limited. And so do you perceive within your work scopes, or even within your even in your immediate environment, do you perceive a way to capture the imagination of the public, to leverage what you were talking about, Meg, this cool factor that we inherently have, to bring attention to what we know and what we are able to know?
I was thinking, it's very powerful when you think just the opposite. So imagine if we would not have satellites, probably we would not even be conscious about or aware of what's happening right now with the planet. We would not even having this conversation. And people, we take it for granted. Everyone takes it for granted. So I think there's a little bit of some work for us professionals, and also the companies and everyone working in the industry, or with a little bit of awareness of what is happening, is that we need to talk more, and we need to talk more to those people that don't understand. And I was having that conversation the other day and saying, if we go right now with our family members and friends, if you talk to them, probably they don't even know the potential that space technology has in reality. They think about space exploration, that's what catches them, but this is like 1%, 2%. And I think it's our fault. When we go to talk to general public, we may go to schools, we may go to kids, but we never really talk to adults, for example. So if each one of us would go and talk to adults and sort of advocate, evangelize it a little bit, I think they would be more aware. And here I'm talking really about planet, climate monitoring, and also talking about communications. We take it for granted, right? Or GPS, you just switch it on, it's there, you don't know. And the other day I was also watching a video about the benefits of space, and it was very simple, which is without space technology or navigation, we would not be able to have electrical grid synchronized, so we would not have power. We would not be able to do that. We would not be able to synchronize systems that allow us to do financial transactions, which allows us to live. Otherwise, it would take ages to have a system like our system, our society. So these are just examples that you need to look for them in order to give them back to people when you talk to them. So I would say, to conclude, we need to talk more to people. We need to talk to our family members, to our friends, and those adults that they are not aware of the good things that space brings to them.
One of the uniqueness of our industry is that we help people to see the beauty and the greatness of Earth, right? I've had the opportunity to do Mars analog simulations, and when I was doing mine, I realized how beautiful my planet was, even though I was in Utah, right? I mean, I didn't leave the planet, and I haven't been in space, obviously. But that experience of 2 weeks isolation, like, don't even mention 2020, please, helped me to realize how beautiful our planet is and all the resources that we have, how magnificent our blue marble is. And that's the uniqueness of our industry, right? And of course, people don't need to live in isolation to realize that we are providing the tools, we are providing the educational sources, all the data that we are providing to the general public daily, sorry, not daily, every second that we are providing data to the public is helping to shape how humanity frames our planet. And that's something that I believe, and please correct me if I am wrong, no other industry has. How we are able to reshape our mental framework.
That seems like a perfect place for me to plug our ongoing Better Satellite World campaign, of which this conversation is a part, which aims to do exactly that. Valentina, I haven't heard from you.
Yep. Well, I do agree with each and every word that was said. To go back on Louis' comment, to besides the public opinion, that in the end is actually like still the most important one, because once you conquer, like you not conquer, but you convince the public, it just spreads around by itself. But still, companies at the same time that the industry is the one that, so I think we are going in that direction, but still, of course, there is competition between themselves, and they should learn more and more to yes, have competition, but like, of course, everyone has to mind of their business, but cooperation is the one that will actually then bring us to improve climate and yeah, and to do what everyone wants. So they should be, parallel.
I was actually going back to what Nathan said about regulatory environment around satellite. It turns out that we all work for the companies that write most of that regulation. Since we consider ourselves the experts on space and satellite, we are typically the ones who at least initiate that regulatory conversation. And so I think, kind of to Nathan's point, a lot of it is up to us to regulate ourselves, to regulate our industry, to make good choices for everyone. It's certainly not the FCC sitting there making all of these decisions in a vacuum. They ask us what it should look like, what is permissible, what is not allowed, what is safe, what is not safe. And I think it's a very interesting point that Nathan raised about our contribution to the regulatory environments, a lot of that does come from us, and we can lead by example there.
Yeah, I mean, I think even with respect to, again, kind of going to like space debris and also considering like our space environment as an environment that we should also take care of, I think that's going to start getting even, you know, more and more important to think about. It already is. I mean, I don't know how often, how often, like, you know, collisions happen off the top of my head, but it's obviously of a big concern. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely important to mitigate. I'm not sure how people or companies are currently doing it, if they're thinking about that. I think it really needs to be a united front, you know, working not just, you know, in the United States, but across all spacefaring nations and emerging spacefaring nations, to kind of come up with, you know, some space law or space treaty or something to make sure that, you know, we're not just launching satellites for the sake of it. And I know that there is the deorbiting, the general deorbiting rule of about 25 years after you launch something. It should deorbit within 25 years. Thinking about, you know, is that too long? Should that be shortened? You know, do you really, you know, making sure that the satellites that you are using, that they're being deorbited safely, how often you really need launches. All these things are, yeah, I think where kind of like space law and space policy, which is an emerging, and I would say like a really interesting area of the space industry, kind of comes into play there, definitely. And then, you know, in environmental laws and, you know, as we're thinking about climate change and moving forward into the future, like how does space play into that? And how does, you know, are you now having to pay some sort of like tax on your launches because this is to offset, you know, like a carbon tax? Is there something, you know, equivalent to space launches to that as well? That would be definitely something to think about. I know people don't like taxes, but something that possibly could, you know, offset some sort of costs. Yeah, I'm by no means an expert, but these are just, you know, ideas spitballing, definitely.
Being able to apply to space environmental laws that occur on the Earth. And using those regulations as a sort of baseline tool to create, you know, rules and regulations for really, it has to be around the United Nations or, you know, a global rule set towards, you know, space sustainability.
The topic of reentry of these constellations. I just was reading the article, right? That they're multiplying the impact of that, the impact that we have with rockets when they go up. You know, they don't go up so often that the ozone layer can't self-repair, right? But these mega constellations might come down super fast all at once and really blow a hole in our ozone layer, which, hey, we actually need that. And so when we think about the regulatory environment, what about the technology? Can we solve that problem, or are we trying to? Are we trying to solve against that? Because we know they're coming down.
I don't have any specific expertise here, but I do know there are a lot of companies that are working to help. You know, number one, make the materials that go into space more sustainable and less harmful to the environment. And then number two, I think there's starting to be a building consensus around need to be more careful about what goes into space, right? It's a problem of scale, just the same way that one coal power plant isn't going to change the climate by itself, but 10,000 coal power plants might. You know, it's the same issue with satellites.
It's kind of this catch-22, right? I mean, we want to put up as many satellites as possible because we want to do as much science as possible. And it's kind of hard because it's especially like, you know, we're looking at certain data, climate data, temperature data, you know, you want a low Earth orbiting satellite. You want to be able to take pictures and things like that. And so it's been really nice that we've been able to get the price down and been able to send up way more satellites because, you know, we are sort of providing more information, but then that kind of puts us into the problem of, well, you know, for all the talk of pollution, you know, are we also polluting the atmosphere? And so I think it kind of goes to Lewis's point about the weight between those two. Are we doing enough good by giving that information that it's okay for us to do that? So I think we're going to have to find a compromise there.
I am not sure about how the ozone get destroyed by the orbiting of the satellites. But for example, these days there's a satellites made by just wood, and I don't know if material helps to help not destroying the ozone.
Oh my goodness, satellites made from wood. Mina, that's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if this helps to destroying the ozone. And I have to think if it's only the ozone we are destroying with a lot of chemicals, a lot of materials.
The issue of sustainability in space, it's a big question. At the same time, I think the amount of pollutants that have been put into the atmosphere because of rockets, because of satellites coming in and burning up in the atmosphere and so forth, it is significant, but compared to the benefits that Earth observation satellites and weather satellites have provided for ecological security purposes, for human security purposes, since the 1960s has been just tremendously huge. That value has been tremendously huge. So I do think that the cost benefit definitely weighs in the favor of those satellites. But, as you guys were just talking about, there's a lot of really great, promising technologies that are on the rise right now. I believe Sydney or Mina had mentioned wooden satellites. That's definitely been really interesting. And SpaceX with the Raptor engine in particular, vying for, instead of the typical kerosene, but methane based fuel. I do think that would be tremendously beneficial.
I want to give everybody one chance, so like kind of a round robin, single answer of just in your space, in your professional life, is there a thing that you think that you could do to help champion the cause of our planet?
That's a big question, Tamara.
I'm going to encourage all my friends to eat fewer avocados and drink less almond milk.
Oh,
Bananas are pretty bad too.
I already don't like almond milk, so I'm already contributing.
Okay, so in your workplace, you're going to say, let's at least fix our eating habits. Is that where we're going with that, Jimmy?
It's a matter of agency, and Raven pointed out that we don't have much agency. One of the most effective means of affecting like a positive action on global climate change is in the United States, we call it lobbying. We pay people we donate to organizations that talk to politicians and influence them, and it's considered the most cost-effective way of fighting global climate change. And though we do, I think it was Michaela said that we do have a lot. We are working directly with a lot of these regulatory agencies. On my end, I don't work with the regulatory agencies. I get regulated by regulatory agencies. So I don't have that much agency. But I did like, I think it was Lewis's, advocacy for the space and satellite industry in general, making science cool again. Right? I don't know. But avocados, almond milk, and bananas are a good start too.
I have written that down. Thank you. Who's next?
Unfortunately, I'm 3 for 3 on those offenses, but I think that making data accessible is always a good thing for the world. And we have a lot of capabilities, especially amongst the individuals who are here today, with all of our resources in providing data to people who can make good decisions, and that doesn't necessarily just mean governing agencies, but that could mean, as I think it was Lewis who was saying, I know Lewis, you're getting quoted the most, but Lewis was saying, talk to your community, talk to the people that and speak to the amazing things that we can do with the technology that's at our fingertips.
For most people, seeing is believing, and if they are actually able to see the physical effects of climate change on their local environment, as well as whether it be weather patterns, whether it be extreme weather, as well as war and conflict. And there's been a lot of really great research about how current day conflicts, Syrian civil war, for example, has been influenced by climate change. And drought and food insecurity and water insecurity. And going back to data visualization, I think that really good science communication, not just necessarily written articles that are very complex and academic, but in this modern era, there's a lot of competition for eyes, for eyeballs, and that means that we got to be able to communicate these impacts visually for people in a very quick and snappy way. That's a tough challenge, especially when we're dealing with, issues that are as complex as climate change and those interactions with human and ecological security. But it definitely can be done. And I think there's a variety of different organizations that are doing just that. And yeah, it just showing that in video format, in social media format, in pictures. GIS is really fantastic towards this, definitely showing people.
Along the same lines of what I was thinking is that, from what I've seen, I think the satellite industry's engagement with things like with users or consumers of data, like scientists, NGOs, governments, I think is uneven at best. There are some organizations that are really focused on it, and there are some where it's maybe less important. And so I think that one thing that we can all do as part of our jobs is when we're engaging with those types of organizations is to really help put forward some of those benefits of how the satellite industry can help tackle these problems, right? How we can help monitor the climate, predict what's going to happen, and drive action to counteract climate change.
I can jump on that as I work for the Space Generation Advisory Council. That is like the largest network for space enthusiasts. For example, in the last Congress that we organized, we had a panel focused on climate change. The same was at the International Astronautical Conference, sorry. I mean, from my side, like personally, let's say I don't work exactly in the satellite industry, so I'm not the one that can build a most effective, let's say, satellite, but sure, I can work more in the direction of communication and awareness through more panels, more awareness on like to deliver to students, young professional, and this is done, of course, through partnership, for example, as SPI, of course, in first person, and many others. And then yes, like communication campaign at our events to speak about that. I guess that's the most effective.
Always go for the kids. Teach people when they're young. Then it's a part of what they do and what they know versus trying to tell someone to, like, once you've already set in a certain way, sometimes it can be really hard for people to want to make that change. But if that change has been incorporated since you were younger, you don't even feel it. You just operate in that way. And since this is a longer term issue that we're tackling, I say start at the beginning and teach people, have a target audience, because also kids like to teach their parents the things that they learn. And
very true.
I think that sometimes it becomes really great for that student to be able to go home and tell their parents something that they didn't actually know.
And I think, for example, in Japan, we try to define the goal for, how do you say, like the goal for New Year's, like resolution of the space agency, according to what the, how do you say, government said. And government kind of follows a rule from United Nations. And then that's why I think we have UNOSA, and then as well as education, we can, and also like a video to get the public attention, but directly to those people, the decision makers, I feel like we just need to like a one paper or something to make it obvious. This has to be included in one line, and this is gonna be taken to the government and the space agency to the company, because company usually gets a contract from government.
We're all big thinkers, which is great, but I think a lot of this stuff, it starts small. And one small thing, we all work on computers every day, right? I feel like that if every company in the world enforced a shut down your computer at night policy, think about the energy that we would save. All of it is not clean energy, right? It's something small, but it's something that we can all do. Just when you're done with the computer, shut it down instead of putting it into the screensaver, or putting it to sleep or whatever. It'll save energy in the long run, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point about what we can do on the individual level. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is, I can't say what program I was working on, but I was working on a program where we were basically trading the type of propulsion that we wanted to use. And the idea of green propellant came up, and this is fairly early when, green propellant was fairly expensive, didn't have a lot of heritage. And, when you're doing a trade, like as I mentioned before, sustainability is not really something that gets considered. But the real focus was to just try and, educate, colleagues about it. It's not like, we weren't sure whether we were going to choose that technology or go with that technology. But the key was to educate them on, some of the softer benefits that we don't think about separate from cost. Even the perspective of like hydrazine is extremely deadly to people. It will kill you and give you cancer. And just from a, personnel safety perspective, there's cost savings there as well with using these technologies. And so it's kind of just bringing it up, and, you might not win that fight the first time, but the second or third time, once people have heard about it and once people are aware of it, you can kind of chip away at some of those assumptions and, the way that we do business. So I think on the individual level, that's one way to do it. And the other thing that comes to mind, since we're talking about kind of what sounds to me, this idea of being, a good space ambassador, if you will. I remember this Thanksgiving, my family and I, we went out to this cabin in basically the middle of nowhere in Colorado. And they had this awesome hot tub in the back. And so it got really dark, and I told my family, I'm like, everybody turn out all the lights inside of the cabin, and we're all going to get in the hot tub. And the stargazing was amazing, the best I've ever seen. And my family, they all live in cities. They've never seen anything like that. Even me just being able to point out, there's a satellite, you can tell it's a satellite, how it's moving and how high up it is. And that kind of triggered a conversation where, I've been in this industry, and my family likes to brag that I'm a rocket scientist, but they don't always know exactly what I'm doing and, some of the projects that I've worked on. And so I think just being good about sparking those conversations on your day-to-day, and showing people kind of the wonders of space. I think that's another place to start. And I feel like it's kind of easy for us because we're already passionate about it. So I think that's the other thing we can do.
Well, I myself do work for OHB as a project manager for a small satellite constellation for Earth observation. So I'm going to be building a hyperspectral imager series that will be used for detecting special gases. It's not quite announced yet, but it's going to be for detecting some leakages. And so I feel like that's my personal contribution to this topic.
Well, one of the things that I keep encouraging is keep the conversation going regarding how the space technology has been helping to shape the future or the history of humanity during the last 60 years. Just imagine that our parents and our grandparents couldn't think the way we think and couldn't perceive the world the way we perceive it, just because we have all this technology available for us. In just one single generation, we were able to reshape the entire framework of how we think, right? So this is something that I keep doing with my friends back in Colombia, because when I tell them that I'm a mechanical engineer with focus on satellites and space, like, people don't really understand that. And when I tell them that what I have been doing, that I work with satellites in geostationary orbit, that my company provides satellite internet, people don't really understand that. So I keep the conversation going with my community, as some of my colleagues were previously mentioning. Also, one of the things that I enjoy to do the most is to volunteer my time to organizations like SJC or the Colombian Space Agency, which is like a private institution in Colombia that provides a space education to some schools in remote areas in the country. And in that way, I help the industry to keep reshaping human history. Of course, when we say human, we imagine, okay, the entire planet Earth and the 7 billion people. But when we start in the small communities with our local communities, with our families, in that way, we are changing how they perceive it, because a lot of people don't know that. They just see the phone and they use Google Maps every day, but they don't understand the entire background behind it. And then when you share with them all of these, you're changing the way they perceive it. They start thinking deeper. And I really love to encourage this conversation.
I really like what everyone is saying, and it really resonates with me. Something I don't know if, I mean, I'm definitely not a champion on the cause for planet or space for the planet, but I do think we need one in some way, like Greta Thunberg. You know, we need someone that advocates for the benefits of space for Earth, someone really visible that everyone can relate to. Like, we have sort of Elon Musk is very known, is a face of space exploration, but it's not space for the planet. So I would say maybe one of us, I don't know, maybe Brendan, maybe Meg, Raven, Camilo, you can be Greta Thunberg for space, for Earth. If I want to give you an example on things that I'm involved with, so my company and many other private public organizations around the globe, so we are engaged with the so-called space sustainability rating, which will provide a new way of addressing the problem of orbital debris. And it will basically provide a way to score a certain space mission in the future, in the way that how much it comply with the guidelines that exist. What about the eco design, sort of the process that it went in order to be launched? It's basically a way to encourage a responsible behavior of space. What we're trying to do is to set up this experimentally and also promote a way to do this in a transparent manner, so everyone understands what's inside, what it's not. We don't know where this will go, but maybe in the future this could be used as a way to regulate what really goes to space, by allowing the ones with really high rating to be the ones favored to go to space, or to have easier access to financing, or any sort of privilege. So this is a way that we can contribute to the sustainable use of space. I think it resonates a lot with the conversation that we're having.
I think I was sort of admiring, the conversation here about, each of us being kind of small people, small players in a very large industry. But I was sort of going back to, even as small players and individual entities in our industry, there's a lot of money in space. I mean, there's a ton of money in space. It's expensive to put up constellations, expensive to run them. It's expensive to buy the equipment on the ground to operate them, to see them as users. There's a lot of money in all of the industry and in all of the things that we do. And I was trying to figure out how we direct or use our little small voices within this huge industry to make sure or help the amount of money in this industry go to the things that we think are most useful. somebody made the statement that the NGSO, the NGOs, there isn't a lot of money in, watching for elephant poaching or watching coastline erosion. There's not a lot of money there. And we have a lot. I was trying to figure out how to make those two things marry up in our work and in using space to further the hard work that is going on in finding climate change and addressing climate change, in assessing ways to impact or reduce climate change on our population.
Truly, I wouldn't have gone into the PhD program I'm in if it wasn't for joining like the Earth observation world and starting a job at Planet. I had no idea anything about like how to use Earth observation data sets or remote sensing or GIS. I didn't know anything about it before I started at Planet. I knew, Python and coding and a little bit of machine learning, things like that. But I had no idea like what I was getting myself into when I kind of entered the world of Earth observation. And so I am doing my PhD because I want to use space technology to hopefully mitigate the impacts of climate change. And so I guess this is like my small, my thesis will be like a small sliver and hopefully making an impact. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think also just things like this, like having conversations like this is really important with, like-minded individuals, and also just talking to like my friends and family and doing outreach and things like that. I mean, everyone has access to social media, and sharing your platform, I think, is incredibly important, especially if you are kind of recognized as like a leader in the industry. I think it's your responsibility to make sure that you're, sharing these kinds of, sentiments and standing up for what you believe in. And in this case, I think we're all really feel very strongly that climate change is a huge issue that we need to tackle. And so using, these sort of opportunities and this sort of platform that we're given with SSPI to be able to advocate for that, I think is incredibly important.
I'm looking forward to sharing the results of this conversation with everyone as we call the industry into this conversation the way that I've called you all into this conversation. And I'm super excited that you have made such a positive contribution. You are the cohort that the industry has put forward to say, these are amazing people, and we expect big things from you. And I want to put a demand on your talent that you put it to good use, not just for your companies, but for the world. And so with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of this evening.